what I don't like about internal family systems. What if a therapy can be useful, emotionally powerful, and still massively overhyped? I left the internal family systems conference I went to with two thoughts. One, that this is a useful therapeutic tool, and two, this movement is way too confident with way too little research. In part one, I talked about what I actually like about IFS. I like the curiosity with our internal world. I like the non-shaming idea that even our most frustrating reactions developed for a reason. And I have used some of the parts-informed work with my clients since and before attending the conference. So this video is not where I dramatically reveal the whole thing is fake, throw the book into the fireplace, and call everyone involved in it a cult. But liking a therapeutic tool does not mean I have to like the hype around it, because IFS, Internal Family Systems, is currently having a massive popularity moment. It's marketed as transformative trauma treatment. Its trainings cost thousands, and the company behind it are aggressive about protecting who gets to officially teach it and certify people who get to experience it. And the amount of scientific evidence supporting all of that is not great. Today, we're going to talk about the research, the money, the lawsuits, and the potential risks that this model has. My name is Mike Shahade, and welcome to Your Brain. Now, the conference started feeling a little culty. Now, when I use the word culty, I'm not saying that IFS is literally a cult. I am describing the atmosphere of the conference I went to, okay? I went to a conference and expecting a room full of clinicians. And maybe in my naivety, I expected the clinicians to act like skeptical scientists. Show me what works. Show me where it fails. Show me who should not be using this modality. Show me what it does better than the other 5 therapy modalities using similar techniques. Instead, what I mostly encountered were people describing how personally transformative IFS had been for them. Not necessarily the clients, them. During the live demonstrations, which part of me did appreciate, the volunteers were not obviously randomly selected from the general population. There were people who had paid to attend this conference, volunteered to publicly discuss their internal lives, and in some cases had arrived carrying stacks of Dr. Richard Schwartz's books. That doesn't mean that their reactions were fake. I did personally experience something meaningful during one of these exercises, but it does mean that the room had already selected for people who were interested, invested, and partially already convinced of IFS to begin with. Then you add a respected founder, a large audience of repeated testimonials of success, emotional demonstrations, and 8 hours of lecture of hearing how life-changing it can be, and yeah, okay, you're probably gonna feel something. That emotional experience might be completely genuine, but a genuine experience is not automatically scientific evidence, okay? Catharsis is not the same thing as a long-term change. Feeling better on a Friday afternoon does not tell us where you're gonna be functionally 6 months later. And watching an enthusiastic volunteer have a breakthrough on stage does not establish how the model performs with an average client in an average therapy office. What bothered me the most, I think, about this experience was what happened when difficult questions were asked to the presenter, Richard Schwartz. His answers, and me and my coworker were joking about this, seemed to fall under one of 3 responses. Either, oh, that's another part. Oh, well, ask that part what it thinks. Or, well, I've been doing it for a long time, so it's easy when I do it. And listen, that's sometimes a effective answer. That's another part, might be clinically useful answer giving some types of questions. But it also becomes like an escape hatch. If a client improves, the self successfully healed that part, and IFS is groundbreaking. If the client doesn't improve, well, it must be another protector getting in the way. And if the client disagrees with the theory, maybe that part that they're disagreeing with is a skeptical part. It's like a way to wash away criticisms or curiosity. If every possible outcome can become absorbed right back into the model, it becomes very difficult to identify what would actually prove the theory wrong. And if it's not falsifiable, I struggle saying that it's provable. Now, honestly, the reason I didn't step up and walk away was because of the co-presenter. Richard's wife, Dr. Janine, gave answers that felt a lot more developed to me. She seemed more willing to actually slow down, understand what the person was asking, and actually offer some clinical explanation beyond the simple applying more IFS terminology and logic to it. Her responses made the event feel more like an educational seminar that I was kind of yearning for, while his responses sometimes made it feel like just a sermon. This is my subjective experience of the conference. But it motivated me to look past the room, the testimonials, and my own emotional reaction. I wanted to see the research, and that is where a much larger problem begins. There's evidence for IFS, but not much of it, okay? A lot of people talk about how there's 27 peer-reviewed studies examining this model. That's not entirely accurate. Sure, there are 27 studies, but 27 studies does not mean 27 large clinical trials. Okay, in 2025, a review that mapped out the research of IFS included only a small number of randomized controlled trials. What that means is that the participants didn't know what they were receiving to avoid some biases or like placebo effect. By mid 2026, now I could only identify about 3 randomized control styles for IFS clinical intervention. So kudos, okay, that's more than 0. It's also incredibly small for the foundations for a modality this level of cultural confidence in. Okay, I mean, we'll look at these trials, all right? The first major one was in 2013, okay, and it involved about 80 people with arthritis. The IFS group reported improvements in areas including like pain, perception, physical functioning, and depressive symptoms. Great. People feeling less depressed is almost usually a good thing. Experiencing less pain is usually a good thing. But the study did not find meaningful improvements in objective measures of the arthritic disease, just our perception of the disease. It was also a 9-month-long group intervention that was compared with the education-only based group, meaning the IFS group received substantially more therapy attention, social connection, and group support. So is it IFS or just a support group that was beneficial is kind of my question. The study suggests that the IFS-based group helped make people cope better with a painful medical condition. I'd bet a nickel or two that any other type of support group would show a similar result. It does not demonstrate that IFS treated the arthritis itself, and the authors of the study appropriately described it as a proof of concept study requiring further trials. They said themselves that this ain't much. This is just the beginnings, that we should do more. The other randomized studies studied depression. Love that, for 37 female college students. So participants were assigned either to IFS treatment or treatment as usual as kind of the control, I believe. That treatment as usual included established treatments with a lot more evidence backing, a lot more ease of access, CBT, and interpersonal therapy. Guess what? Both groups improved. Great, people felt better. The study did not establish that IFS was better. Again, a group of 37 females of college age is not the most inclusive research group we want for studies. Okay, that's because the study being so small, such a small population, there's no significant differences being able to come to be because of that. It doesn't prove that the treatments were even equivalent. It means that we had a tiny pilot that gave a reason to conduct a larger study, just like the arthritis one. The larger definitive study still hasn't arrived, okay? In 2026, researchers published a randomized pilot of PARTS, a group program based on IFS for people with PTSD. This was a meaningful improvement in the research quality, okay? 60 participants, still small, better than 37. And they were randomly either into the PARTS group or into a stress reduction program. Listen, both groups experienced a significant reduction in clinician-rated PTSD symptoms, okay? The self-reported studies themselves have their own issues, but clinical-rated might some biases, whatever, that's a tangent, whatever. The point I'm trying to make is the IFS-based group attended more sessions and reported greater satisfaction, but there was no statistically significant differences between the PTS symptom reduction between the two groups, okay? So we're seeing that IFS isn't causing harm in these small pilot studies, but we're not seeing that it's performing better than other modalities. Again, this study was really useful in assessing that we need more studies, okay? It does not support saying that IFS has been proven equal to EMDR, cognitive processing, or prolonged exposure, or CBT, trauma-focused therapy. Like those studies, the gold standard for trauma treatment, were not compared in this group at all. So there's not really any evidence saying it's better or necessarily even equivalent to those gold standards. It's a very small start of studies happening, yet it's framed and presented as like the gold standard, the new solution to trauma work, and that rubs me the wrong way. Okay, I'm not a trauma therapist. I have not received any formal training when it comes to trauma modalities. I read the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing module, 3rd edition. I read it because honestly I'm a bit of a nerd and I liked reading the manual. It was entertaining, it was enjoyable, frankly, for me. But I don't see trauma clients. I don't work with trauma clients. But I have a specific place in my heart that really screams out to me about the severity of working with those suffering from trauma. The work done with them is very different than traditional talk therapy. Okay, there's certain things you have to put in place to be sure that the client is safe. Talking about something difficult or uncomfortable with a client in traditional talk therapy, I'm not too worried about them going home. But if I talk about a client with trauma and I kind of crack open that wall of trauma without doing the due diligence to keep them safe afterwards, that worries me a lot when it comes to that client's safety. And so it really rubs me the wrong way, where the more like gold standard of trauma treatment modalities are cheaper to learn, have a heck of a lot more studies supporting it, and a lot more history behind it, compared to IFS, whose trainings are multiple times more expensive, fractions of the number of studies supporting it, and yet seemingly more popular than all the other ones now. These have all been small studies, and the difference is incredibly important. A pilot study, which the last one was, is supposed to tell us that this is interesting, let's study it more. Not, hey, we discovered how to permanently heal trauma and its roots. Give me $4,000 real quick. Trauma deserves a higher standard. I am not a trauma therapist. Okay, I am not a trauma specialist, and that is exactly why I'm so cautious here. Trauma treatment is not just ordinary exploratory talk therapy. Okay, you may be working with severe dissociations, intrusive memories, emotional flooding, and suicidality, risk of harm, and disruptive reality testing. Okay, it's a nervous system that has been freaking fried. Okay, that repeatedly reacts as though the traumatic event happens. The work is difficult and far more dangerous than traditional talk therapy. As such, the work deserves exceptional training and careful stabilization, clear safety protocols, and stronger evidence than IFS presents. Major PTSD treatment guidelines currently recommend approaches like cognitive processing therapy, prolonged exposure, trauma-focused CBT, and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. Okay, IFS doesn't occupy nearly the same evidence position as any of those other therapies. That does not prove that IFS is ineffective, and it also does not prove that IFS is in fact effective. It means the confidence around IFS has moved way faster than any of the other trauma treatment modalities, without nearly the same level of research, and that's worrisome. When conditions is serious, maybe this work shouldn't quietly, this is a proven trauma healing modality, because the explanation sounds compassionate and clients enjoy the exercises, it seems, in my experience. Clients' preferences do matter, okay? Client retention does matter, and IFS does good on retention, honestly. And feeling safe with your therapist also matters. But liking a treatment and completing a treatment are not the same as that treatment outperforming established alternatives. And I don't think we have any effective studies showing that the effectiveness are even equal, frankly. Then the price, the company, the profit. This is where I become a little less academically skeptical and a little more personally offended. Level 1 IFS training currently costs between $3,900 and $5,300. The institution describes it as 90 hours of instruction and supervised practice and a low participant to staff ratio, okay? It frames itself as kind of high quality, substantial training quality, okay? But the money doesn't stop at level 1 training, okay? That's just the beginning. No. It goes to level 2, okay? That's gonna run you another $3,000. Then it goes to level 3 training. That's gonna run you another $3,000. Someone trying to complete all these levels of training therefore has to spend about $10,000 in tuition alone before traveling, lodging, consultation, and missed work as you learn this modality, okay? And after completing level 1 does not make you someone formally certified in IFS, okay? Certification after all the trainings is a completely different process with additional pricing, additional consultation, and additional continued education, okay? I don't think it's bad that there is a long rigor to get yourself certified in a certain modality. I think that's effective. Now, the expense does not automatically mean exploitative. It's a 90-hour training, okay? And it should cost more than a weekend getaway to learn a modality. I think you should have to put in that time and intentionality between learning a new modality, especially those focused on trauma work. Though, when compared to the other gold standards, the price is abnormal to say the least. And given the low level of peer-reviewed evidence offered to it, indefensible, okay? I'm sure it's not cheap for IFS to do these trainings. And I'm also sure they're making a pretty nice profit in doing it, okay? They have to pay for their own trainers. They have to pay for their own lodging in areas that they offer the training. Sure. But when you frame yourself as a healing, transformative therapy, it feels a lot like gatekeeping, okay? Community mental health clinicians, not gonna be able to afford the training. Early career therapists, not going to be able to afford that training. And counselors serving lower income populations, the populations that typically need more clinical help are not going to be able to afford a $5,000 level 1 training. Then you add in the hours where you're not able to see clients. Then you add on the consultation that you have to do to go through the training. Then you add the advanced training. Then you add this and that and that and that. And now, then the people most likely to work with the severely under-resourced trauma populations may be the people least able to access the official education. And when compared to the other modalities showing more validity, more efficacy, the price really starts to frustrate me, okay? And when a for-profit company presents its model as part of a compassionate movement of global healing while tightly controlling an expensive training pipeline, I think it's fair to examine the contradiction. And trust me, they are very serious about controlling it. In 2025, the Center of Self-Leadership, which is kind of the business name of IFS Institute, sued PESI, Evergreen Certification, and Dr. Frank Anderson for infringement on their ideas. PESI and Evergreen, if you're not familiar, are the kind of training organizations that encompass a lot of like decentralized trainings. They're relatively affordable and very accessible for clinicians. Dr. Frank Anderson was not some random clinician who watched 3 TikToks on IFS and started selling a course on it. He had served as a prominent leader within the IFS ecosystem. Okay, he was a certified trainer for them. He worked with them for years. The dispute arose after Anderson and PESI developed and marketed their own version of an IFS-branded trauma training and certification program at a much more affordable price. The institution, IFS, alleged trademark infringement. Fair, okay? False advertising, unfair competition, breach of fiduciary duty, and breach of contract. Okay, the defendant argued that, among other things, the terms like internal family systems describe the therapeutic model and should not be extensively controlled in the way that the Institute, IFS, claimed. Fast forward to 2026, and a federal judge allowed most of the institution claims to continue. The court dismissed the breach of contract claim against PESI with prejudice and dismissed the claims against Anderson's corporate entity without prejudice, while allowing the remaining claims to go against the defendants to proceed. This is not a final ruling that the institution won. It's not a ruling that PESI or Anderson committed trademark infringement. It means we're able to continue beyond the dismissal stage. Okay? Basically, Anderson tried to decentralize IFS to make it more accessible to others, surely for him to make a pretty penny as well. Okay, and I get both sides. On one, you build a training program that you have a lot of pride in, you establish some standards, and you have a recognizable credentialing. You don't want any other company just trying to sell it to consumers, then mistake it as yourself. At the same time, this hasn't happened in a vacuum. The lawsuit shows how seriously IFS intends to control who can commercially teach and certify people use IFS's name. And that is where the larger tension becomes really uncomfortable for me. Okay, the scientific evidence is small. The public claims are large. The training is expensive and the institution is aggressive about control over it. IFS appears to be very cautious about who gets to sell IFS. But I would like to see the same intensity directed towards proving how well IFS works, identifying what it doesn't work well with, and studying who might potentially be harmed with it. Okay? This is an important cautionary. There's a little controversy, okay? There was a little tea happening a while ago on this place called Castlewood Treatment Center. It was a eating disorder facility where former patients filed lawsuits alleging that highly suggestible treatment contributed to unethical, disturbing, or uncontrollable recovery of memory narratives. Okay, Castlewood was operated by psychologist Mark Schwartz, no relation to Richard Schwartz, and though Richard Schwartz served as a consultant and staff trainer, okay? And he was included in some of the patient sessions, but he was not named as a defendant in the Castlewood lawsuit, okay? IFS Institute has stated that the alleged practices violated IFS principle and that the previously unknown recovered memories should not be treated as fact without corroborating evidence. It's a nice statement. If you feel like you resurface a new memory, that doesn't necessarily mean that memory is real, okay? Fun fact, memories aren't wholly accurate. They're reconstructive, not fully retrieval. Now, still, okay, this doesn't prove that IFS created false memories. It doesn't prove that Richard Schwartz was responsible for what former patients alleged happened there, okay? It doesn't prove that he was culpable or responsible for anything that happened there. He could have just been an innocent bystander, okay? But it does remind us about why trauma therapy requires extreme caution though, right? When a clinician uses guided imagery, internal character, childhood parts, and assumptions of hidden wounds, they need to remain deeply aware of how memory is reconstructed. IFS ideally is non-directive when practiced properly. A lot of the time when he was showing us examples during the live conference, most work he did was shut up and listen and let the client do the work. I think that's valid. But practice it properly is not a substitute for researching potential harms. Okay? Safety standards and being honest about the limits of knowing what we know. Okay? And then there's the spiritual component to it, which I don't necessarily dislike, but again, none of this happens in a vacuum. This is one of the more branches of the IFS ecosystem that I have to mention because it demonstrates how easily clinical metaphors can slide into like the metaphysical certainty, right? Some advanced IFS trainers discuss something called unattached burdens. These are not described as ordinary protective parts, okay? They are sometimes framed as outside energies or presences that entered a person's internal system and don't actually belong to them. One of the advanced clinicians wrote a book titled The Others Within Us, Internal Family Systems, Spiritual Possession. And Richard Schwartz wrote a foreword and described encountering this phenomenon himself, while also saying that he tries not to become overly focused on what these experiences are. During the conference, he also mentioned that one of his techniques relates to shamanism. There are literal spiritual entities, psychological phenomenon, metaphors, or something else. He leaves the question relatively open, okay? To be clear, this is not what every IFS therapist believes. It's not the focus of the standard parts work that I personally found helpful. And I'm not arguing that people should be forbidden from interpreting their experience as spiritual. I feel like that could be very healing and collaborative for a lot of clients. People bring in religion, culture, and ritual into therapy all the time. Nothing's inherently wrong with that. But a licensed clinician needs to be extremely careful when the language moves from "it feels as though something foreign has taken control of me" to "there is a literal foreign spiritual entity inside of me." These are not the same clinical statements. One validates a person's experience, the other makes an extraordinary claim about reality. And extraordinary claims deserve more than institution case studies and compelling workshops. Okay? Independently, any of these critiques or issues I have with IFS, I could imagine to swallow it with some whatever with it, okay? But it's all of them kind of compounded that paints a very familiar story of a convenient modality that takes from other modalities that do work and frames itself as a lot more powerful than the actual peer-reviewed evidence indicates. Now, listen, I don't think IFS is a scam. I think that IFS can actually be a very useful therapeutic tool living inside an institution that has become way too confident and controlling in itself. I think it's a very, very, very well marketed synthesis of older therapeutic models whose popularity has substantially outpaced its research. The model gives people a compelling map of the internal world, but a compelling map is not an automatically scientifically valid map. Personal testimonies are not clinical trials. A profound conference experience is not a longitudinal outcome. High client satisfaction is not proof of superiority. And listen, an expensive certification is not evidence that a treatment works. A compassionate philosophy does not protect an institution from criticism. For a general population, okay, exploratory parts work language may help a lot of people create distance from engulfing emotions, reduce the shame beyond reactions, and become more curious about themselves. I think that's very useful. I have seen enough value in that process to use some parts-informed work myself. But trauma is more serious. Until IFS has larger studies, independent replication, and direct comparison with established treatment modalities, I do not believe that evidence justifies presenting it as the same level as other more extensively studied trauma therapies. You don't have to reject IFS, and you also really don't have to join in on the hype. Take what's useful, remain skeptical about what is unproven, and remember, there may be no bad parts, but there can still be bad science, bad marketing, and bad business decisions. Let me know what you thought about this video. Was I being a little too cynical, or maybe not cynical enough? My name is Mike Shahade, and I'm happy you're here. See ya.